biology and then you studied genetics. Was the environment always part of that?
Well, you see, I never really thought of it as the environment. I love nature. And my father, for some reason, now here was my father, the eldest in a family of 7 children, of immigrant parents. And immigrants coming in poor, what they do is they tell your kid, you got to work hard, you got to go out and make money. That's the whole drive. That's why they came to Canada. Those are the values that were inculcated in my parents. My father was the eldest. He was supposed to be a model for the rest of the kids. And he loved fishing. He loved camping. And so my earliest memories of childhood are going fishing and camping with my father. And I can remember the family always gathered on weekends with the grandparents. And I can remember my grandparents bawling out my dad. Why did you take David fishing? You could have been working and making money, you know? You got to be more serious about it. And I always said to Dad, what happened? You were a mutant. Like, what the hell happened to you? Thank God you were a mutant. But it was my father's love of the outdoors that it was as natural as breathing was to me.
So what did you imagine you were going to be when you grew up?
I thought I was going to be a fish biologist, quite honestly.
Right.
I thought, what could be better to experiment with an animal and then eat it when you're finished with the experiment? But then I fell in love with insects, and I thought I would be an entomologist. But it was in university that I took a course in genetics. I had been accepted to medical school in my hometown, and I had to take biology then before I went into medical school, and I took genetics. And once I did that, that was it. I turned down the place in medical school and decided to go on and become a scientist.
Were you political as a child, and when you got older, did you stand for boards? Did you like to think of yourself as a representative in some way?
No, I saw myself as a Japanese Canadian who we were quite active in fighting for recognition of the wrongs the government had done and so on. But I really was involved with black people in the United States. When I was down there, I was in a town called Oak Ridge, and I was the only non-black member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Politically, I mean, I ran for high school president. Can you imagine? And
did you get it?
I did, which was really amazing. There were only in a school, it was really a white school. I think there were 5 Japanese kids in there. We were all related. My sisters are my cousins. There were no black people and maybe a couple of Chinese. It was very white. But you see, when you're in high school, the world is divided into 2 groups, the innies and the outies. Now, the innies are the beautiful people. They're the cheerleaders, and they're the wealthy people, and they're the football players and basketball players. And the outies are everybody else. The outies are sitting there wishing they were innies. And I decided to run as school president by rallying the outies and saying, look, I'm not an innie, but there are a lot more of us. And I won more votes than all of the others put together.
So what, in your view, has changed about the messages we hear about the environment from the time you were graduating to now?
What we did, we got caught up in it partly for health reasons. When the first book came out that described the impact of pesticides, which really, Rachel Carson's book started the whole environmental movement. It was about the hazards of these technologies to our health. By the 1960s, the breast milk of women in North America was considered too toxic to feed to babies. So that really galvanized the environmental movement. And then we began to look at charismatic species. Oh, let's protect the baby seals from sealing, and let's protect these big trees. And it was kind of we just wanted these beautiful creatures. And it was very, very successful in the early days. I mean, when in 1962, there wasn't a Department of the Environment in any government on the planet. Very quickly, millions of people were involved. In 10 years, the United Nations had set up the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, called the first global conference on the environment in Stockholm in 1972. And we got laws to protect air and water and endangered species. and millions of acres of land set aside as parks. So that was a great success of the movement. But what is astonishing to me is that many of the battles we fought 30 and 35 years ago, where we claimed great victories, we stopped that dam, we stopped those super tankers coming down our coast, we stopped the drilling for oil in the ocean, and guess what? We're fighting exactly the same issues that we fought 35 years ago. They've come back. And that signals the failure of the environmental movement, I think.
So you say that was a failure of the environmental movement.
Yes.
It brings to mind the debate about vaccination. You know, now we're seeing some of the diseases that we vaccinated against reappearing because there are certain people who don't believe vaccination is completely safe. What is this about, do you think? Is it just that different generations approach problems in a different way? Or is it the fact that a message for some reason can't endure?
I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question, but I think the vaccination case is an example of where really bad science was picked up by the media and made into this sensational story. The media love the stories where authorities can be questioned. And I think vaccination was one of the great discoveries and insights in science and medicine. And the fact that this guy in England, on unbelievably shoddy work, was able to claim that vaccination seemed to be inducing autism has done an unbelievable disservice.
Do you see similarities with the whole climate change debate in this?
Absolutely. In 1988, we had reached the absolute height in awareness. And that's the year George H.W. Bush ran for president and said, I will be an environmental president. He didn't give a damn about the environment, but Americans had put the environment at the top of the agenda. In 1988, our prime minister was reelected and appointed the hottest candidate or politician in his party to be the Minister of the Environment. And I interviewed him and said, how serious is what's the most serious issue facing us? And he immediately said, global warming. So I said, wow, how serious is it? And these are his exact words. It threatens the survival of our species. We have to act now. That's 1988. So then what happened? Everybody was there. We knew that it was a problem. The politicians had heard the word. We went into a depression afterwards, and right away the economy trumps the environment. But not only that, the fossil fuel industry began to spend not millions, not tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to support think tanks, right-wing think tanks, to support websites, to support scientists who are saying this is junk science. It's not true. It's a natural process. It's not happening. And it worked.
But there are people who do question
Of course there are, but that's not what the scientific community is saying. You know, I'm not a climatologist. I'm not going to defend what the climatologists have gone through and reached. Why should, when you have this vast group putting huge amounts of effort into bringing out reports about the state of the world, and believe me, they're unbelievably conservative because they're getting hammered all the time by the fossil fuel critics.
You're talking about the IPCC?
IPCC and any climatologist. Yet overwhelmingly, there's no question, climate change caused by humans is simply accepted as a fact. Yet the impression one gets then, by allowing these people to pose these questions as if they're legitimate questions, is, oh, well, the science isn't in you. You see that? They're still trying to defend themselves against these critics.
Do you think your views on climate change, and also I sense over the years that your language has changed. In a way, perhaps you're more desperate because time is running out? Or is that ridiculous?
No, I think that's a valid thing to say. The sense of urgency has been getting stronger. I suspect part of it is my age, because, you know, when you're a younger person, you've got all these concerns that might temper what you say because, well, will it jeopardize my promotion? Well, you know, you're concerned about money and power and position and all that stuff. When you're retired, you're freed of all of that kind of clouding, and so I see it clearer and more starkly. On the other hand, a survey recently found that yes, older people tend to be more, have a sense of urgency that it's really critical. Young people, on the other hand, whose entire lives lie ahead, who are going to feel the impact much more upbeat. I'm thrilled to hear that. That young people are not demolished and say, "Oh God, it's too late." They just feel that they've got to get out and do something, and that they can do something. So I think part of the language I use is that I'm an old man, and maybe just getting worn down. That's all.
But you still feel that frustration. I mean, this isn't a job for you, is it? Getting angry?
Of course not. I don't make money doing this. No, it is my responsibility, I think. My goal, my hope is, I'm in now what I call the death zone. I'm in the last part of my life. And that's not being morbid. It's just realistic. I'm going to kick the bucket soon, and I'm very close to that. I want to be able to be in my deathbed. I hope I will be in my deathbed with my grandchildren gathered around, and I will be able to look at them without apology and say, I tried the best I could for you. And that would be the best way for me to die, to be able to do that. That's my job. And I say this to elders. Elders in Aboriginal communities, elders occupy an unbelievable position. They're revered in society. We treat elders like a pain in the neck. They ought to just get the hell out of the way. They don't even text message. They don't know how to use the bank anymore. But elders have got something no other group in society has. They've lived an entire lifetime. They've had an entire experience. They've made a hell of a lot of mistakes. They've had a few successes. They have learned important lessons. So I say to elders, get off the golf course, get off the couch, get on with the most important part of your life. You owe it to the young people now to tell them what the hell you've learned. That's why they're revered among Native communities.
Do you feel that you, in your older age, have been brushed off somewhat?
No, I have been very, very fortunate in that I have had a platform. It's the counterpart to the ABC. We have the CBC in Canada. And for over 35 years, I have had a program on national television to come before the people. Now, when I started on television, I thought my talent was translating science to convey it to the public. I was just a messenger providing the information so that they could make more informed decisions. To my astonishment, it doesn't work that way. People don't remember from week to week what the hell you say. What they do remember is that you were the guy up there telling them about important stuff. And because they think he's credible, they trust me. And what they've done is exactly the opposite of what I expected. I wanted to empower the public, and instead they've empowered me. And if I call the Prime Minister's office, chance is overwhelming until we have our present Prime Minister who hates my guts.
Doesn't want to hear from you.
But when I've called the Prime Minister's office in the past, I get a call back either from him or his office in an hour. Not because I'm such a big deal, but because they know 1.5 million to 2 million people watch my programs.
So you've got an immense amount of power.
So that's given me an immense, And I never knew that this would be the consequence. What is very, very interesting is that in the last 10 years, I'm actually going into boardrooms that 20 years ago, they would have locked the doors if they saw me coming. I was a devil incarnate. And that may be a reflection of the extent to which, even in boardrooms of corporations, they can't ignore the environment as if it's not an issue of concern to them. And if it's an issue that's going to affect the bottom line, maybe they better let that jerk Suzuki come in and tell us what the hell's going on.
I get the feeling that you're more a glass half full kind of guy, despite a lot of the criticism that you make. If I can finish on this point, is there one thing that you regret not having achieved in your life so far?
Well, I never think of my life as seeing as
a whole,
as a success of achieving certain goals, But I certainly feel as regretful as anyone about what I call the failure of those of us that were in the movement. That is, in the early years, the very heady years, it was a very exciting time. But we failed to see that the challenge really was shifting perspectives. And we call this the paradigm shift. We had to, the challenge was to show people we aren't the species in charge. The planet wasn't there for us to use in any way we want. That we had to recognize we're a part of a much bigger world, and we depended on nature for our well-being. That was the change. And we missed the opportunity of the battles, of using the battles to get people to see a deeper point that we had to change in our relationship with the earth. And I regret very much that we didn't keep our eye focused on that context, on the paradigm.
David Suzuki, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for speaking with 1+1.
Thanks for having me.
David Suzuki,